Welcome to the Matt Phillips Podcast. I am Matt Phillips, your sales leadership coach, mental toughness expert, and founder of Matt Phillips Coaching. We help sales managers and leaders make more money, save time, and become kick-ass leaders of their sales teams. And that's what we're here to talk about on this podcast. We are here to give you the tools and tactics to build a well-oiled sales machine and teach you the mental toughness skills so you can show up confident, focused, emotionally in control, and ready to energize your team. It's time to talk sales leadership and mental toughness. Let's get into today's episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's podcast. It is Matt, and today I want to dive into something that I work with companies on a lot, and it's how do you effectively transition salespeople to that sales management, that sales leadership role. And you know as well as I do, being an individual contributor and switching now to a management role, it's literally not for the faint of heart, if you will. It is different. It takes a different way of thinking, of behaving, of acting, a different way of showing up every day. And, you've probably seen the stats as well as I have about just the difficulty in successfully making that transition. And so as part of one of my programs, actually, we run the sales leader, the sales manager program to talk about how do we effectively set ourselves up to be successful, right? Because nobody wants to enter a role and, take on that new kind of bigger role, more responsibility, all that stuff. Nobody wants to step into that and ultimately fail. And so in our different programs, we walk through how to effectively do that. And I thought today it'd be worthwhile to spend a little time with you. Maybe you are looking to transition into that management role from a sales perspective. Maybe you are you're already in that role and you're just kind of brand new to it and trying to figure it out. And frankly, maybe you've been in a role like that a long time and you're just trying to figure out how do we, set other people in the organization set up for success, and how do you take your game to the next level as well. Now, I know some of you listening aren't in sales, and that's totally okay, right? Everything I'm going to talk about today is how do we elevate ourselves as leaders in whatever role that you might be sitting in, because it's about getting the most out of your people, about crafting this compelling vision and getting people to do ultimately what they said they were going to do in order to make the company and your team successful. So I want to touch on a couple things. One, when you kind of make this decision, whenever I'm talking to salespeople and just people in general about, you want to take that step up and do this, it's giving them a perspective of understanding what they're getting into and making sure that they are very clear on, like, this is the responsibilities of the role. It's going to be different. And this mindset that they have to have going into it of, I have to be willing to let go of certain things from the past in order to transition to that next stage in my career and in my role. And oftentimes, we think something seems really, cool and this is going to be amazing. And we haven't really just taken a step back to, it's not deterring people from stepping into that role, but it's also painting this picture of reality, right? Of, for example, instead of being that individual contributor and you get to out and set your schedule and do all these things, you can still do that. Yet you are going to have to now manage people, and you're going to have to be a little more flexible on their schedules. And you're going to have to dive in and understand, like, how do you motivate people when they're operating on their own schedules as well. So it's just kind of painting this picture of, like, understand what you're getting into and making sure you've had the discussion of, are you ready to take that on? Are you ready to transition to this? And most people will say yes. And once they commit to that, then it's, okay, now how do we set them up to be amazingly successful? So if you're at that point of, you're looking for that kind of role, that next role, or maybe you just got into that role, I know some people are sitting there being like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe I signed up for this. And especially from a sales perspective. And listen, I hear stories all the time. I've seen it firsthand where individuals step into that management role and they realize, wow, this really isn't for me. And if you've, tried your best, if you've actually, done the work, things like that, and you determine that that's not right for you, totally okay. Like, go back to a role where you're going to feel that energy and passion and motivation, all that sort of stuff. So just keep that in mind. as you're progressing and as you have people underneath you kind of progressing to those next ranks as well. So super important. But let's get into what I really want to talk about today. And I wanted to just lay out the framework that we teach at Matt Phillips Coaching when dealing with different sales leaders that you can kind of leverage. And I'll push on a couple of different points as we go through the podcast today that I think are super, super important. And just, again, areas that you need to be thinking about if you're going to be the most effective leader, no matter what your role is. So we talk about these 5 elements when we talk about having a clear picture of how you want to show up as a leader and what expectations are, and painting this picture and doing all these things. And they are, as I'll share with you, the first is identity. The second is vision. The third is team. The fourth is execution. And the fifth, we wrap it all around with, of course, one of our specialties, mental toughness. Right. So when I touch on these different pieces, identity, vision, team, execution, and then mental toughness, identity is really first, right? And one thing I find with leaders and ask this question of like, have you set the identity of your team? Right. Well, if people ask, like, who are you guys? How do you operate? Like, what makes you different? That you kind of are able to set that tone for your people. And, I'm a sports guy, and I know not all of you listening are, but if you look back from an athletic perspective, right, there are certain teams, football teams, hockey teams, whatever, that have an identity, right? Meaning when you play them, you know what you're getting. You know how they're going to show up. And whether you like that identity or dislike that identity, like, you know what you're going to get. And I remember back, I'm a Denver Broncos football fan. Don't judge me for those of you non-Bronco fans, but I grew up on Denver Bronco football, and we used to, and still do, play back when I grew up, the Oakland Raiders. Now it's the Las Vegas Raiders. But the Raiders had this identity, right? And you knew when you went up against the Raiders that they were a tough group, man. They were just a bunch of mean guys who their entire goal was kind of rip your head off. And nothing wrong with that. But when you walked into that game, you knew what you were going to get when you played the Raiders. Same thing. My son plays hockey now, and there's some hockey teams, if you look back in the past, I remember in particular, like Detroit Red Wings of the past, when you played the Red Wings, like, you knew what you were getting, right? Extremely physical people. They had a ton of Russians on the team. I mean, you just knew what you were getting with them. So you prepared that way to play against the Detroit Red Wings. And I say that from a Colorado Avalanche fan perspective. We had some battles back in the day, but you knew what you were going to get. And I think from a leadership perspective, the same thing is true. It's like, what's the identity of your team? And one area where we focus a lot with different individuals is it's answering this question, like, what is your leadership philosophy, right? What is your leadership style? How do you show up as a leader? What are the expectations you're setting for the team? Because when you dive in and you're able to answer that and paint the picture of this is what it's going to look like when you join this team, right? In motion, in action, that you're able to get the most out of your people, right? You're able to shift from this very reactive state to a very proactive state. And a lot of times, and if I were to ask you that question right now, like, what's your leadership style? What's your leadership philosophy? How would you answer that? Right? And what I found over my career, the past 11 plus years of running this business, is that in 95% of cases, either leaders have no answer, or I get these, honestly, very cliche answers. So for example, I have an open door policy and I care about my people. And I'm like, okay, I get what you mean, but that's not unique to you, first of all. And it's not how you talk about it. But second of all, like, what does that mean? What is it going to look like when they're working for you? How's that going to show up? And that's identity. So when they work with your team, this is what you get. And of course, I hope it's positive and, focused and like we're all in it together type stuff. But nonetheless, it's identifying those critical things. So part of the programs that we run is helping individuals and leaders identify and hone in on their personal leadership philosophy, from how they talk about it, like that elevator pitch, all the way down to the metrics that they're tracking, so we can make sure that we're showing up that way. And the beautiful thing is when you have an identity established, the people you're looking for to fill different roles or grow the team, expand, They just seem to find you, right? No different than the Oakland Raiders of the past. They drafted players. They would trade for players that fit that mold, that fit that identity. Because when they had those types of people, those people could play within the system that was set up for them most effectively. And that's the same thing in sales leadership and leadership in general. How do you attract those types of individuals who can operate effectively within your system? I'm sure you've seen it too, where you have someone who just doesn't fit the right mold of the team you're trying to create. And there's this, I don't know, a little animosity starts to form, or it just starts to rub the wrong way a little bit. That's the importance of that identity piece. So that's kind of step number one, the identity piece that I really want you thinking about when you transition to that sales role. It's having a solid identity, having carved out time to actually think about what that looks like. The second step after you establish your identity is to create your vision. And I interviewed, if you haven't listened to it yet, or I don't even know if it's out yet, but go look for the interview I did with the CEO of Yes Communities, Steve Schaub. And he paints a really, really nice picture where he says his job as a CEO, and I believe this is the job of every leader and sales leader, is to cast this vision and communicate the vision so that everyone in the organization knows where we are going as a company. And I think the same thing applies to your sales team, perhaps, right? Of casting that vision of like, this is where we're at, this is where we're going. And whether that's with data and metrics, or there's some more subjective stuff within there as well, and how the team's going to grow, great. But it's casting that vision. And Steve said in the interview that, if his vision, his dream is that if I were to walk up personally, like to walk up to anyone in the company and say, hey, describe the vision, like where are you guys going as a company, that they would be able to answer that. And I think that's really powerful when you think about it. So for you, it's sitting back and understanding and dreaming a little bit of like, where are we at a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Making sure you're diving into like, what markets are we going into? What processes need to shift? How do we, keep this environment similar as part of that vision, that identity part of where we're going, and have just very clear thoughts and beliefs around like why we're doing this. So again, as part of our programs, we take people through like, okay, this is how you step through that process to create that vision and make sure you're communicating that most effectively, because people want to get behind a vision, a compelling vision, an inspiring vision. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves, right? That's why I started this business in the first place. Of like, I wanted to work with a bunch of different companies to help them grow, help them develop all these individuals, because I know we're stronger together. I know we can create something amazing together. And so I've got to paint that vision so people are attracted to it and are willing to do the work behind it. So that's that second kind of key component that I wanted to share with you today that's critical. So identity, vision, and then we come to team. And this one is interesting as well, because it's taking a step back and understanding, what do we need as far as skill sets, personalities, what attributes do we need to have to make sure we have the right team to get this across the finish line. And so not only do we dive into like the structure, right, the org chart, but I wanted to press on kind of one area in particular, because there's a lot under the team, right? How do we hire the right people? How do we onboard the right people, right? And kind of get them to learn faster. How do we, this concept called know your customer, right? So how do we understand the right questions to ask to actually be able to influence those people on our team and just outside our team, right? And clients in general, but within our team specifically, how to make sure we're surrounding ourselves with the right people, that we're asking the right questions to really expand the opportunities within these teams and improve processes, all these things. But there's one particular area that I really want you to think about and go through, right? First of all, I don't see enough people take a step back and look at their org chart and really determine, like, is this the right team? Is this the right layout? And kind of challenge the way that things are set up. And that takes a particular skill set and a way to look at that and people that you need to integrate to do that. But beyond that, I've spent a lot of time talking to people about constraints. Within this structure, like, where do constraints lie? right? What is getting in your way? What is causing the bottlenecks? What constraints can you identify that you can actually do something about? And you can remove them. And maybe that's through delegation or hiring someone new or outsourcing it to a third party or just getting temp help from an agency, right? But it's taking a step back and understanding like where are the constraints? Because if you relieve those constraints, right? If you think about that bottleneck concept, right? If you have to go to the same person for approval on everything, as an example, well, at some point that person's going to be tapped out and they're not going to have time to look and analyze and give approval on everything as timely as you want. So then the question becomes like, oh, okay, I've now identified that as a constraint. It's holding us back. It's getting in our way. It's delaying things. And it's figuring out a solution for that, whether it's bringing it to the team or whatever. And so my challenge for you as leaders, when you're looking to make that transition from just individual contributor to that manager role, you want to relieve as many constraints as possible to the other individual contributors, whether it's salespeople or not on your team. You need to spend time thinking about that and removing those roadblocks by whatever means necessary. And again, when I look at different individuals I work with, not a lot of time is spent on that. And it's critical to everything, right? It's I don't know, no different than any area of life. If we want the best relationship, we got to take away constraints. If I want to get, as fit as possible, I've got to remove constraints, right? It could be a simple thing of like one of my constraints, things holding me back from getting in shape, is that I have to drive 15 minutes to get to the gym. Well, maybe I can look for a gym that's just right down the street. Maybe I can build something in our garage. Maybe I can build something in our basement. So it's taking away that time element, that constraint to say, no, I can walk downstairs. I can go outside. I can drive just 3 minutes or 2 minutes to the gym. It's removing those little constraints, right? So this is personally, this is professionally, and that's what I believe separates a great leader from just someone in a role, is that they're constantly looking like where are those constraints, communicating with the team and actively trying to remove those. Now, I know some of you are sitting there saying, well, Matt, that's easier said than done, right? Because, I've tried before and there's no money and all these sorts of things. But oftentimes we hold back from creatively attacking some of those constraints or having those conversations where, yes, we do need an investment in order to make this thing go away or to streamline the process. But don't negate the ability to be creative in this process when we talk about constraints. A story I love to share is with this individual that I've known for a number of years now. And he is in the talent development space, so learning development space for a massive organization. His name is Julius. And he worked for another company years back, one of the biggest banks in the world. And he was telling me this story one time when the economy was not in good shape. The first thing typically to go at companies is learning and development. Like training budget goes out the window, right? I'm sure you've experienced that before, right? Tighten the belt a little bit and there's certain costs that go away right away. Well, his budget went from millions of dollars to zero overnight. Zero, literally zero. Luckily, he still had a job. Luckily, he could show up every day and continue working. But you want to talk about a massive constraint? Take a multi-million-dollar budget down to zero overnight and say, hey, but still we need to develop our people. So good luck to you. Julius told me how in that moment he had to get creative, right? How do I deal with this constraint that's been put upon me? And he started getting his creative juices flowing. And it was unreal what he said. So what he realized is that he needed to attack this differently. And one thing is, as he was doing his research and reflection and just thinking about what possibly I could do in this situation, what he discovered and what he remembered was that this company also happened to sponsor a bunch of different things. So one of the things was the Boston Philharmonic. Another was a sailing team. And there were a variety of these little sponsorships that could not be canceled, right? That were going to continue no matter if the economy was good or bad because they'd signed the contract. And so he's like, I wonder. So what he ended up doing was contacting these companies, right? The Boston Philharmonic and the sailing team and saying, hey, I want to bring you in. I want to engage you because we're already paying you a lot of money to do some leadership development stuff for us, or I want to bring leaders to you in that city. And he actually set up programs where he had people go like to the Boston Philharmonic and the conductor of the orchestra talk to them about leadership, about leading a team. They had people out to the sailing teams so they could walk around the boat and hear from the captain and some of the crew about what leadership really looks like, what high performance looks like. That year, when Julius had no money, he was awarded this, he was given this award basically in the learning and development space, that he was like just awarded for this creativity by this industry in coming up with something amazing and developing his people. And I'm always blown away by that because he chose in that moment to look at this constraint and do something about it and get creative with it. So I only tell you that story because maybe you're sitting there saying, well, it's not possible, Matt, or I know the constraints, or, I've tried before. If Julius can do it with no money and get an award for that, you can do it as well. Right? That's not always about money. It's about looking at the different possibilities. And that's what we're going back to our programs. It's like, how do we identify those constraints? And then let's get creative. Let's figure out how do we remove them. That's part of that team, right? So our identity, vision, team. And I know I'm just touching on a couple of points within each one, but then that leads us to the execution side of things, right? That planning side of things. So if we have the right identity, if we've created the right vision, if we know we've set up the right team, then how do we build the right plan to go execute? And how do we measure some of those items along the way? And so I'm sure you already thinking like, okay, it's building out sales plan and, learning how to coach our team and making sure we have rules of engagement so we know how to interact with each other. We've got the right processes in place. We're delegating, we're managing email, we're having effective meetings, like we're executing after we've set this plan. One area though, that I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about today has to do with the time management aspect within it. And oftentimes when we're talking about execution, we're all distracted. There are so many different things we could be doing or feel like we should be doing. And it comes down to really two things. One is a just crystal clear understanding of what the true priorities are. Like what is really driving the business? What is really going to move the needle in that sales role or with your sales team or with whatever team you might be leading? What really are the key priorities? And oftentimes I see, individuals make a list of priorities and it's 10, 20 things long. And I sit there all day long and I would say the same thing to you if I saw that list. I would say no possible way. What are the top 3 they're going to move the needle in your business? I'm flying out to Fort Lauderdale next week to work with a client, and we are reviewing what they said last quarter to see if are those still the top 3? What movement do we have in the top 3? Do we need to shift what the top 3 are? Because we cannot do everything. We cannot boil the ocean, as they say. It starts with just boiling one pan full of the ocean first, and then moving on to the next. So it all comes down to first understanding what are those priorities, and then the time management aspect of it, where you spend your time follows those priorities. And it's the ability to say no. It's the ability to say not yet. It's an ability to explain the key priorities that you're focused on to make sure that you are doing the things that are going to move the needle. That's what execution is to me, right? It's understanding the priorities, executing the plan, managing our time well, and then the results will take care of themselves. But it's that ability within the time management aspect of whatever methodology you follow, right? We teach this, what we call pro time management in our programs. And it's about a certain methodology of ways to, block time, look at your priorities, all these sorts of things. But whatever methodology you happen to use, every single day when I'm working on something, it's always tied back to like, is this in alignment with the priorities that I have? We have 4 that we focus on, and they're actually right over here. I moved it yesterday, so they're right over here. I constantly look at them. I can see them, and everything that I'm doing, even recording this podcast, before I record the podcast, I look over and I'm like, is this really driving the results I want in my business? Is this going to help that vision become a reality? And that's the key thing of like focusing on that and making sure we're doing those right things. Okay. So time management is a huge piece of it. It's, as a client of mine says, they build the plan, they start executing the plan, they measure results, and then they adjust. And it's the same thing within that execution side that's key. So those are the 4 of the 5, right? So we have that, set that identity, create that vision, build the right team around it, have that plan and execute the plan, that execution side of things. And as you know, then it's all about that 5th element, the mindset, what we call mental toughness. It's what's going on in between your ears that will determine if you are a good leader or not. It's determining how you handle adversity, how you bounce back when things get tough, how you celebrate when things are going well. And I will tell you right now that, when we talk about mental toughness, right? Because I joke with people, I'm like, oh, I want that. I want to be resilient. I want to have a strong mindset. I want to be mentally tough, Matt. And then I ask, well, what does that mean? Isn't that the tough thing, right? Well, what does that mean? And so with Matt Phillips Coaching, we've identified this is what it means. And there's also 5 elements within that. When we think about being mentally tough, here's how we define it: confident, focused, emotionally in control, energetic, and you stay committed to that intentional, consistent action. Right? So when we're going through and teaching people how to do this and different tools and techniques and all these sorts of things, it's to drive those 5 elements. But at its baseline, it is 100% confidence. Am I doing the right things to be confident in myself and my ability, in knowing that when I look in the mirror that I may not have the answer, I may not know what the next step is, I may not have everything pulled together, but I can still be confident in myself and my ability to achieve that outcome. That's the basis. Wouldn't you agree with that? It's those times when we chip away at ourselves and we're not confident in ourselves, and all of a sudden we start questioning our ability and questioning ourselves. I mean, the reality is this: you are in this position for a reason. I mean, here comes your pep talk for the day, right? You are in this position for a reason. You've experienced success in the past. You've overcome things in your life, in your business, and you were set up in that position for a reason. And you can't forget it as you're going through this, that you need to look in that mirror and be like, yeah, I am enough. I am amazing. I am incredible. I am curious. I am always looking to get better. I am always looking for that next step. But it starts with I believe in myself and what we can do. And then it's about then taking action upon that. Confidence is everything. You cannot set that aside, right? It's like fake it till you make it. Well, there's a point to faking it till you make it. But the faking it is not really faking it. It's like you got to work on yourself, on that belief inside, because that will drive everything else. And that's why we're so passionate. Like when people say what we do, it's like, yeah, I'm a leadership coach, right? I run a leadership development company, and we also focus on the one true differentiator in every area of life. And that's mental toughness. That's the mindset piece. I'm telling you right now, if you invest your time in building your mindset, right, I'm becoming confident, making sure you stay focused, you have that emotional control, you're waking up actually energetic, and you stay energetic during the day, and you take that consistent, intentional action, sky's the limit for you. I'm telling you, sky's the limit. So when we talk about transitioning from, I'm an individual contributor to becoming a leader in sales or a manager in sales, we're talking about maybe in accounting, finance, operations, name it. When you take that step up, that's where we coach our individuals, right? On those 5 elements we walk through: identity, vision, team, execution, and the 5th one being mental toughness, right? You start chipping away at those in that framework, amazing things can happen for you. So that's what I want to talk about today. And listen, we are here as a resource for you if you need help. If you have not gone to mattphillipscoaching.com/quiz, please go do it. There's kind of a cool little quiz on your sales leader superpower, which is starting to help you understand your identity and how you show up for your team. Again, we have all these tools that we can put together to make sure that you are successful throughout. So take some of what we talked about today, so take what you learned and start applying some of those, and just watch your leadership level rise. So with that, I will leave you for today's podcast and can't wait to see you next week. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you for joining us today on the Matt Phillips Podcast. If you are like us, we know that you are here to do great things, to become the sales leader that makes things happen and drives big time sales results. We know you have that big vision, and we are here to help get you where you want to go. We're here to help you develop that unstoppable, rock solid leadership skill set and help you train to master the one true differentiator: mental toughness. We would love to be part of your journey. So if you are ready, head over to mattphillipscoaching.com and check out the ways that we can help. As always, please share this episode and make sure you subscribe by clicking the button below. Thank you again. And now, go crush the day.